A wife throws a celebration party for her husband, yet during the dinner, he keeps flirting with her assistant. The wife senses something is wrong, but refuses to believe it. Until one day, in her husband's office, she sees wedding photos of her husband and the assistant. Not long ago, Eun-kyung's husband, Ji-sung, became a medical consultant for a law firm. Eun-kyung asked her colleagues to organize a celebration dinner for him. During the gathering, the beer at home ran out. Her husband offered to go buy more. The assistant also stood up and went with him, saying she was afraid he wouldn't be able to carry everything alone. Eun-kyung felt something was strange, but she didn't think too much of it. Later, while Eun-kyung was on her way to work with her husband, a voice message came through the car's hands-free system. Eun-kyung tapped it open. A woman's voice asked where her husband was. Her husband reacted strongly, scolding Eun-kyung for listening to the message without permission, then lied, claiming the woman was Director Choi from the hospital. Eun-kyung was doubtful. When she later went to the hospital to look for him and checked the staff directory, she discovered there was no Director Choi at all. Suspicion growing, Eun-kyung went to her husband's office to pick up their daughter's phone. On the desk, she noticed a photo delivery package. She opened it. Inside were wedding photos of her husband and the assistant. Fury surged through her. She forced herself to calm down. Looking at the family photo of the three of them on the wall, she felt nothing but irony. Soon after, her husband called, asking whether she had been to his office. Before leaving, Eun-kyung had carefully put everything back the way it was. To avoid exposing herself, she lied and said she hadn't been there. After hanging up, she smashed her phone in anger. She never imagined that one day, a divorce lawyer who handled other people's failed marriages would face a crisis in her own. Eun-kyung told Yoo-ri that she had long known her husband was having an affair with the assistant. Yoo-ri couldn't understand why Eun-kyung was so calm. She angrily condemned the cheating couple, urging Eun-kyung to file for divorce immediately, split the assets, and stay far away from the scumbag. But Eun-kyung said she had no intention of divorcing. One was an assistant who had handled her work for 10 years. The other was a husband who had helped raise their child for 13 years. If she drove both of them away at the same time, her work and her life would completely collapse. Yoo-ri couldn't agree with Eun-kyung's thinking. No matter what she said, Eun-kyung refused to budge. That evening, Eun-kyung returned home, staring blankly at the cake and gifts she had carefully prepared. Today was their wedding anniversary. Unbeknownst to her, her husband was with the assistant, being intimate and affectionate. Before leaving, the husband assured the assistant that he wasn't going home to celebrate an anniversary, but to negotiate a divorce. When he got home, he went straight to the point, asking Eun-kyung how long she planned to drag things out. He said he had already expressed his desire to divorce, but Eun-kyung had never responded. Eun-kyung didn't want a divorce. She hoped there was still room to turn things around. Her husband accused her of devoting all these years to work, ignoring the family and their daughter. In his eyes, Eun-kyung wasn't a wife, just their daughter's mother. Rather than becoming the most familiar strangers, he believed it was better to separate cleanly. Eun-kyung stood with her back turned, speechless. Even so, for the sake of giving their daughter a complete family, she still didn't want to divorce. The next day at work, Yoo-ri received a woman seeking divorce consultation. Mrs. Park arrived with her daughter. According to firm policy, each client was allowed only 5 consultations. Mrs. Park had already come 4 times. This was her final chance. Mrs. Park's daughter explained their situation. Her father was an alcoholic, and her mother was living in misery. She hoped her mother would divorce as soon as possible. But Mrs. Park hesitated. She believed that when he wasn't drinking, her husband was actually the best among all the men she had ever been with. She also worried that her husband couldn't cook, that he wouldn't be able to survive without her. Yoo-ri couldn't understand why a victim would cling so humbly to such a broken marriage. She reminded Mrs. Park that this was her last consultation. If she couldn't make up her mind, she would have no choice but to continue enduring her alcoholic husband. In the end, after strong persuasion from her daughter and Yoo-ri, Mrs. Park signed the divorce lawsuit. Eun-kyung was surprised that Yoo-ri accepted the case. She warned her that Mrs. Park would definitely regret it. Feeling frustrated, Yoo-ri confided in lawyer Kwon. She said she wanted to become a lawyer who could help unfortunate women break free from the chains of marriage. But in reality, women trapped in terrible marriages often didn't want to divorce at all. Mrs. Park was like this, and so was Eun-kyung. Yoo-ri accidentally let something slip and asked lawyer Kwon to keep Eun-kyung's husband's affair a secret. Lawyer Kwon promised not to tell anyone. But Yoo-ri wasn't the only one who knew. On the day of the celebration dinner, lawyer Jung personally saw Eun-kyung's husband return from buying beer, arm in arm with the assistant. She invited Eun-kyung out for drinks, believing this was the reason Eun-kyung refused to divorce. But Eun-kyung was clearly resistant and unwilling to talk about it. Lawyer Jung could only promise that no matter what happened, she would always support Eun-kyung as her partner. Soon after, Eun-kyung became emotionally drained. Mrs. Park requested to withdraw the divorce lawsuit. She said her husband had promised that as long as she went home and cooked for him, he would treat her well. Yoo-ri finally snapped. She told Mrs. Park to block her husband's number, then give her own number to him instead. Soon, Yoo-ri received a call from the husband. Drunk and slurring his words, the man cursed at Yoo-ri for breaking up someone else's family. He claimed that all his friends treated their wives casually. If Yoo-ri refused to let his wife return home, he threatened to kill himself. Yoo-ri ignored the unreasonable man and hung up. Already exhausted, she unexpectedly ran into the assistant downstairs. Realizing they lived in the same apartment building, Yoo-ri felt deeply uncomfortable. Worse still, her mother had already become familiar with the assistant and even knew that the assistant was living there with her boyfriend. When Yoo-ri realized that her mother's so-called boyfriend was actually Eun-kyung's husband, she completely lost it. Even as an outsider, she couldn't tolerate such a scumbag. Yet, Eun-kyung stubbornly refused to divorce. The next day at work, Yoo-ri received news that Mrs. Park's husband had been hospitalized.
She rushed to the hospital, only to be met with a barrage of abuse from Mrs. Park. Mrs. Park blamed her, saying it was because Yoo-ri encouraged the divorce that her husband ended up in the hospital. Physically and emotionally exhausted, Yoo-ri felt lost for the first time. She asked Eun-kyung what she should do. Eun-kyung told her to wait and observe. The man was clearly using a self-pitying tactic. When Yoo-ri returned to the hospital again, Mrs. Park was by the bedside, serving her husband as he continued to curse at her. When the husband tried to hit Mrs. Park, Yoo-ri rushed in to stop him. Mrs. Park insisted on withdrawing the divorce. She blamed her bad fate and said she lacked the ability to leave the marriage. Just as Yoo-ri didn't know how to persuade her further, Eun-kyung suddenly appeared. Eun-kyung reminded Mrs. Park not to fantasize that her husband would change. Things might only get worse. She said they would no longer limit the number of consultations, hoping Mrs. Park would think it through properly before coming back again. Yoo-ri didn't understand Eun-kyung's change in attitude. Eun-kyung seemed to be talking about Mrs. Park, yet also about herself. At a certain moment in life, people finally become willing to face the truth. Yoo-ri agreed with Eun-kyung, but she still decided to resign. She had entered the profession with hope and passion to help others, yet she could see no future. Before leaving, she told Eun-kyung that her husband and the assistant were living together, then gave her the apartment complex address. Eun-kyung went there and saw them in the elevator, holding each other, laughing and chatting happily in the supermarket. She recalled how her family of 3 once shared the same happiness.
Now her husband was giving his love and patience to someone else. The anger of betrayal and the collapse of her family made her break down in tears inside her car. After calming herself, Eun-kyung suddenly rushed in front of Yoo-ri in a frenzy. Yoo-ri was packing up, preparing to leave. Eun-kyung stopped her, saying she had not approved Yoo-ri's resignation. She then handed her the divorce case files. End of episode. All right, that's all for today. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. I will be back with rest of the story soon.